Hello everyone and welcome to episode 91 of Competitive Magic with the Carnies. I'm your host from Italy, Andrea Mengucci, and joining me today we have Newton Hang from United States. Hello Newton, welcome to the stream.
Hello Andrea, thank you for inviting me on. I think it's gonna be fun.
Yeah, we're gonna talk about my favorite legacy deck, and I assume your favorite legacy deck, which happens to be the same. It's gonna be black-green natural order, credit control, however people call it these days.
Yeah, there's like 20 different nicknames for the deck out there right now. Obviously the origins is it's originally an elf deck, but that's where it came from.
Yeah, there's very little elf at this point. There's basically just Elvish Reclaimers left.
Right,
But
it's just one elf now.
yeah, so I had some amazing results with this deck, and I started playing this deck after watching your videos. So I am very happy to have you here. For those of you that know, Newton has a Patreon just on this deck. He makes a lot of videos on YouTube. Streams regularly from a completely different time zone that I am. So that is very nice to catch the YouTube videos, and I assume it's the same for many of you to me. So yeah, Newton, how come you like this deck? How come you don't like to play Brainstorm? Tell the listeners about the skills of playing a green deck.
So I get that question asked a lot, and actually it just started from a few years ago because I used to play a lot of elves, like when Glimpse of Nature was a more popular legacy card, and something about creatures I think in different formats that has always drawn to me. So I played some Dual Commander, and now it's pretty popular, but like I played goblins, which is like a tribal type, and then like D&T used to be a deck that I used to play as well. I played Delver in Legacy, but it just wasn't as fun for me personally. So that's kind of the reasoning. And before you could just draw a lot of cards with Glimpse of Nature, but this deck is obviously very different now, and only keeping the really broken green cards like Natural Order and Green Sun Zenith.
Yes, Cradle, of course.
And Cradle, of
All
course,
right.
right?
Yes. So for those of you who are not watching the YouTube video but are listening to the podcast, let's kind of introduce the deck. So what is this? So we're playing 24 lands, which by the way, for Legacy, it's a lot. Like average deck play, let's say, 20, or in the blue decks tend to do even less. But we need to hit all our land drops, and some lands don't even add mana on turn one, like Gas Cradle or Dryad Arbor. So that's why the very high number of lands. We have a lot of fetch lands, 9. We have 2 Bayou and 1 Underground Mortuary. That is the survey land, super important. We have a lot of special lands because our deck is actually a toolbox. We have a lot of ways to pick up lands from the deck. We have Lair of the Hydra, that's the creature land from Aether. We have Bajuka Bog. We have 2 Dryad Arbor. We have 4 Gas Cradle, and we have a card that is fantastic and probably one of the reasons why this deck is so successful now, Talon Gates of Madara. This is a new card from MH3 Commander, so it's not legally modern, just in Legacy, and it comes into play and target creature phases out. Now, phase out is not a normal mechanic that we used to play. So what is phase out? Basically, it doesn't blink a creature, but it phases out of the game and it returns at the beginning, at the untap phase basically, of the owner. So you can play this card and blank a blocker. This gives colorless mana, but also filters mana. So you can filter some blue or white to cast Atraxa, definitely handy. And then finally, for 4 mana, you put it into play from hand, and this is something that you can do as a way to like surprise your opponent. And now it might sound weird to play all these like strange lands, but the reason is because of Elvish Reclaimer and White of the Reliquary, which are actually the way the deck function. You play White of the Reliquary, you sacrifice creatures, you get lands, you get value from your lands, and over time you accrue value and win the game with that. My question to you, Newton, is when have you discovered the synergy between White of the Reliquary and Talon Gates of Madara? Was it just at the beginning of MH3, or did like somebody else, you saw some list and thought to add it to your credit control deck?
Actually, I played. So for those who follow the history of this deck, the card that used to be in the Wide of the Reliquary slot is Fiend Artisan, and it already played Elvish Reclaimer. And when I saw Talon Gates of Madara spoiled, it looked pretty good to me. So I tested, prior to the release, a Sajiri step, and I knew for sure Talon Gates of Madara was going to be good. I didn't think it was going to be 2 copies. So that came later when I realized how good it was. And then obviously also coming out in my Modern Horizons 3 was Wire of the Reliquary, and they both tutor lands, so it was kind of obvious if it was good with Reclaimer, it would be good with Wire of the Reliquary. Even better, actually.
Yeah, so you're saying that the first iteration of this deck, the Cradle control, was playing a Sejiri step. So when you saw Talon Gates, you're like, this is just an upgrade. It saves my creature, it blanks a blocker, it does so much more too, like filters mana, comes into play on top. It's so much better than Sejiri step.
Yeah, sort of. So I wasn't playing Shijiri Step because I didn't think it was good enough. But when Talon Gates and Madar got spoiled, I was using it as a placeholder. And then in my testing, I thought, oh, this is just so much better than Shijiri. Because Shijiri, when I did it by testing, would cost me games because it came in tapped, or like you can't do it on your opponent's creatures, which is really big actually, because that's how you deal with hate bears and things like that.
Yeah, it definitely the so when you first come across this card, you don't really feel the power, but once you play with it, you just blow up your opponent so much. Like if you have an active Elvish Reclaimer and an active What of the Reliquary, basically they have, first time X proof. They're like Mother of Runes because your opponent plays a Fatal Push on them, you just sacrifice whatever, an elf or a hierarch, and you pick up this land and you save it. Or your opponent attacks with a Psychic Frog, and you just block with whatever, they discard to pump it, and you just blink it after the discard. And just does so much that, overall, you just really see the power of Watch of the Reliquary the more you play with this deck, and it's all because of Talon Gates. And also, like, sometimes just putting this from your hand just comes out total surprise. Like I won my winning in for the top of the fourth season when my opponent just attacked, just spent infinite resources to kill my Reclaimer and What of the Reliquary, phasing them out with his Knight of the Reliquary and Reclaimer, just to be able to attack with a 2020. And I just had Talon Gates in hand, so I paid 4 mana and just put it into play, phased out the Maritlage, untapped with all my creatures, and just won the game from there. So, like, it just takes people completely out of surprise. That 4 mana thing actually comes up a lot because this deck has a lot of mana thanks to Gaia's Cradle, and it's actually very hard to play around it because it's just that's the only instant of your deck.
Yeah, that's good to hear. I'm glad you're sharing that story because, like I said, during the testing, I realized Talon Gates would be very good because unlike Shijiri Step, which is dead if you draw it, Talon Gates is always live.
Yeah, it's still like obviously a bad draw. If I mulligan to 6, I'm very happy to put it at the bottom because I'm very happy to draw, to have it in the deck when I have Reclaimer and white, which is your whole gameplay. Like you play 3 Once Upon a Time and 4 Greens and Zenith, so you really just do that over and over. Like your gameplay will just be to, either kill your opponent quickly with a natural order with Criteria of Behemoth or Atraxa, or just grind them, and when you grind them, you always have white or Elvish Reclaimer around. But
exactly.
Yeah. To tell the listeners again, the rest of the deck, how it's made. So we have 24 lands, we have 27 creatures, we have 8 hierarchs, ignoble and noble, which is, very uncommon for a legacy deck to play these cards. We have 4 Elvish Reclaimer, we have 3 Once Upon a Time, that is the one and only cantrip of this deck. So many times I keep lands that are basically no landers, because they have either Gaia's Cradle or Dryad Arbor, but they have Once Upon a Time, so they help me start. So you basically have, let's say, Bojuka Bog also not great, so let's say you have 17 lands plus 3 Once Upon a Time to kind of like start your game. So far, I've never been burnt out of it. I don't know if you had, but whenever I kept a hand without a turn 1 mana source and Once Upon a Time, it always gave me a land.
Yeah, I've been burned, but it's so rare, and I just think Once Upon a Time is just so powerful that it's definitely still worth it. Like I do the same thing. I keep one land hands or zero land hands all the time because the once upon a time you just assume it will hit.
Yeah, exactly. And then you have, of course, white. We have a card here. I guess we'll talk about it later because I've seen lists without it now from your side. But then, of course, you have the busted cards, the cards that are not legally modern, Grist and Zenith, Natural Order, which picks up both Atraxa and Behemoth, which just wins the game on the spot. Um, a card that I've been so impressed with, and I just think that's one of the reasons why this deck work is endurance. So the higher you win, the more you win in a tournament, the more likely is that you're gonna play against graveyard decks. The later rounds of an event will always be blue black scam basically, or even just graveyard strategies in general. So you just need this endurance to be in your hand, like so that when your opponent, let's say, mulligans to 6 and goes Entomb, Reanimate, you just have it, because otherwise you're just cold to that start. You're not fast enough to deploy the White of the Reliquary with Bazooka Bog, and you just die to a very quick Animate Dead or Reanimate. So I feel like endurance is actually a way to kind of have a force of will in a format where combo is very good, and it's needed for you to just kind of have like this early game action, other than, of course, the super good card that is endurance, 3 mana, 3/4 flash reach, so you also cast it, but just having it in hand, it's like the force of will that this deck needs.
Yeah, I actually completely agree. And it's funny because independently you came to that conclusion, and I always mention to like anybody in my Discord or Patreon the same thing. Like it's literally 75% of the time it's the green force of will.
Yeah, so during the tournament, I played against. I guess I should say what tournament I'm talking about. So I've played 2 tournaments with this deck, 2 very long tournaments. One was the Impact Returns with 8 rounds of Swiss, and one was the Four Seasons with. So Impact Returns was 240 player. The Four Seasons was 380 players. So 8 and 9 rounds, and combined, I lost 1 match, which is pretty good. And I think I've never had such a strong run in Legacy with a single deck without changing a single card. I'm usually always changing cards, but this time I just ran the same 75. I even posted the same picture on Twitter. I didn't even bother taking a new picture. Um, and um, and yeah, the deck just felt so powerful, and even against the combo decks, basically all the combo decks right now are graveyard based. So even when I played against the shallow grave deck, that tried to kill me on turn 1, I just had endurance. So I won the game because they just had like Lion's Eye Diamond. They discarded their whole hand, and I had endurance. Or so many times they just tried to get you with the Entomb Reanimate thing, which sometimes they had grief in the past, which made it harder. But now that they don't have grief, it's actually like either forceful or bust, because of course like force negation and days don't tend to work because you expect it, so you don't do the turn 1 noble hierarchy if you have endurance, and they played that deck. So it's a lot. It's just, again, it's so important, and you have once upon a time to get it to. And again, the latest the round of a tournament, you really value mulligan into it a lot, because this deck actually mulligans quite well. You have very bad cards to put down, like if you draw Traxa, Behemoth, or as I said, Talon Gates, Bazooka Bog, a second Cradle. So this deck actually is very happy to put a card on the bottom of the deck sometimes. So it's very solid, and I went to this podcast with you also to, I guess, share it a bit more, because despite maybe you you talked about this deck a lot. When you look at Decklist or you talk to people, and I talk to people about this deck, like nobody actually believes me when I say what I play, because they always expect I play some sort of blue deck that's the tier 1. But I say, no, trust me, like this is the real deal. And so yeah, I'm very happy to be here today.
Thank you very much, Andre. It makes me really happy that you not only had success with the deck, but you actually enjoy the deck too. And thank you for spreading, I guess, the good word about the deck, since a lot of people don't believe me either when I said, no, I think this deck is really good. And then it also rewards players who have good fundamentals. So obviously, Andre, you're like an awesome player, and you do. I always say it rewards players who are good and limited. So a player that I know that who had a lot of success with this deck too is Mats Ellington, who goes by Mats Olay on MTGO. So that's the trend that I've noticed. Like usually anybody who has like a good grasp on combat and just like limited fundamentals tends to pick up the deck more easily.
Yeah, and let's talk about the last card of the deck, which is another MH3 cards that you had, in I remember one copy in your first video that I watched, and then the second video that I watched, you had four. So it's definitely a card that raised your attention, which was a Springheart Nantuko. This is, the bestow creature that legacy player tend to not know what it is because it's too new for them. So anytime I bestow a creature, they just ask me. So if I kill it in response, what happens? I have to explain what it does. So if I bestow a creature, let's say I bestow a turn 2, I go turn 1 Noble Hierarch, turn 2 I bestow the Noble Hierarch. What happens is that my Noble Hierarch will become a 1/2, and whenever I play a land, I either make a 1/1 or I can pay 2 mana to get a copy of Noble Hierarch. And if you kill the response, I just get the Nantuko into play. Now, this card is super strong in combination with Gaia's Cradle, because it just makes so that as early as turn 3, you just have so much mana to work with. You can play your whole land, you can easily have 2 mana up for every Reclaimer, and whatever comes up. So, Springheart Nantuko is very good, both as a threat, because of course you can just put it on whatever, White of the Reliquary Endurance, you make copies of it with fetch lands, you just kill your opponent very quickly. But it's also just an enabler for your game. Like, you just get the game so quickly. Like, it's turn 2, and you already have done so much. And I really like this card. And what are your thoughts on this card right now?
I think it depends on the metagame. It's a card I like a lot in when you expect to play a lot against fair decks, because it grinds so hard and like the bestow mechanic is very difficult for your opponent to interact with, especially if they have like fatal push or that kind of removal that doesn't hit enchantments. But against if your metagame has a lot of combo, I like it a little bit less because it's 2 mana. Obviously, against some combo decks, you have to board in Thoughtseize, so you don't really get to develop as easily. So it really depends what you expect to play against. Is my experience.
Yeah, it's definitely very good against the normal decks. The worst card against this one is Wrath of the Skies. I don't know if you've ever got Wrath of the Sky. Your Nantuko, but I actually one of the only loss that I had was against blue-white Dreadnought, and they just Wrath of the Skies me post board, and
Yeah,
I had the Nantuko, so I thought I was safe, but I was not.
yeah. My experience is the only commonly played solutions to Nantuko are either Wrath of the Skies or the other one is out of these bug bean decks is Witherbloom command is good against it too because it's a non-creature at that point, right? They can clean that
Yeah.
and get a land back.
Yeah, that's true. So you can force of negation this when you bestow it because it's a non-creature when it's on the stack. Unlike, for example, Grist, which you can't force of negation because on the stack it's a creature. And yeah, speaking of Grist, that's the last card in my list, and that's a card that we've been talked about it a lot because you actually don't play it in your deck. Is that correct?
I played it in earlier iterations, and usually when someone asks me, "Oh, what list should I play?" Like they're picking up the deck or something, I usually refer them to your list because I think Grist is the type of card that can get you out of situations if you don't have, if you're not maybe as familiar with all the legacy decks that are around. It's removal, so it can answer a Murktide region. I think it is not as good as before for 2 reasons. The plus mode is, for the most part, worse than Springheart Nantuko, and for defensive purposes, the Talon Gates of Madar actually helps a lot now in covering. You can race easily a Murktide region now, so that's the other reason why I think it's less necessary. But I think it's fine if you, for instance, run into a lot of containment priests or whatnot.
Yeah, so there's a bunch of synergies that Grist has in your deck. Of course, it's a green card that you can pick up of Green Zenith. Again, that's not a play that you can do in Modern, and I think it's super powerful whenever you just have like not enough mana to Zenith for a Traxxas Behemoth, but you have actually a lot of mana, and maybe you already have a white going. You just don't want a second white, or maybe like you're running out of Talon Gates because you naturally drew one. you play the second one, so you actually don't have that much to do. So you just get Grist. And also Grist +1 Mulligan Nantuko, super sweet because it's an insect. So you actually get like extra value, and you can immediately -5, which is actually the play I won. I raised the Marit Lage in that win and in. That's how I was able to deal the final damage with the -5, blanking all the attacks of Marit Lage. And another card, another important thing that this card does, it's killing Psychic Frog. So you mentioned racing Murktide. Yes, you can do that. But Psychic Frog is this type of card where, when it hits, maybe once, maybe twice, you feel like you're so behind and you actually need a way to kill it. And just Zenithing for white doesn't kill it. It just, if you untap with white, then you'll have an answer. So I like to just have an immediate answer to Psychic Frog. And that's why I like the one Grist, and it's a nice card to draw too. Just very good with Gas Cradle with a +1. You mentioned that Nantuko does the same thing, but just I guess I want more effect to just flood the board to make sure that my Cradle just stops for 1,000,000 mana.
Yeah, I think you bring up a lot of good points. I think the main appeal that you just mentioned with the Psychic Frog is, yes, if you untap with Rather Reliquary, you probably will still survive and win against the Psychic Frog. But if you know your opponent, or excuse me, if you sense your opponent has 2 removal spells in hand, then yeah, it's probably better in that situation to tutor for the Grist, deal with their Psychic Frog, and then pivot the game from there.
Yeah, I want to mention a play that happened to me at 4th season. I was a 6-0 playing against the Scaminator deck, and my opponent had the frog. I had Grist. I Grist in hand, and I also have Bojuka Bog in hand, and I also have another land. So what I do is they have 1 card in hand with Psychic Frog in play. Sorry, they have 2 cards in hand with Psychic Frog in play. And what I'm doing is I'll play Grist without making the land drop to play around days, because I guess the previous turn they didn't have days, so I didn't play around the top deck days. My opponent discards Atraxa to Frog to reanimate it with the last card, and then just go natural Bojuka Bog from hand to exile the Atraxa they just discarded. And I feel like if I didn't kill that Frog there, but I just played, let's say, another card, my opponent would have connected with Frog, and eventually the game would have just, I don't know. Whenever the blue deck connects with Frog, it's never a great feeling. So I just really like to have a way to just straight up kill it.
No, that sounds perfectly reasonable. Like, I think our deck is unique in that we can probably survive 2, sometimes even 3 hits from Frog, because a lot of their draws are not particularly great against us outside of specifically removal. And especially if you already untap with white, then it doesn't really matter. But yes, if you're behind it, it's nice to have the answer immediately.
All right, let's talk about the sideboard now, because we've talked about the main deck in this podcast. I wanted to talk about our deck list differences, but also talk about the plans. Actually, before going to that, I want to show the viewers your most recent list, which is, as I mentioned earlier, slightly different than mine, because you really love a card that I don't love as much. Sylvan Safekeeper, you played 3 copies in your last 5-0 a few days ago.
Yeah, so the main idea is, I think, Andrea, you agree, the strongest creature in the deck is Wire the Reliquary. And the main idea was just, we're going to force Wire the Reliquary through every game. One issue with having 3 copies is you don't really want to draw 2. So I think the correct number is actually probably 1 or 2 copies, because you never really want to draw 2 copies of Sylvan Safekeeper. And unlike Natural Order Once Upon a Time, the power level is a lot lower. So that's mostly the main idea of Safekeeper. But it's been great for me also to lower the curve. You have more 1-drops, so you can start double spelling earlier as well. So those are kind of the main appeal of the card.
Yeah, I guess we haven't talked as much about Wire of the Reliquary. This is a card that I got to the point where I say 2 mana 2/2. If you untap, you win. And this is not what it reads, because it reads 2 mana 2/2 Vigilance, gets +1/+1 for each creature in your graveyard, tap, sacrifice another creature, get a land from your deck. But the way this deck plays, is that it puts your opponent under so much pressure so quickly because you attack with one of your 8, maybe even more than 2 in play hierarch. So this card attacks for like 4 or 5 as early as turn 3, and then from there on you will disrupt your opponent, taking away their graveyard, taking away their creatures with the Talon Gates. You in the meanwhile have like a lot of pressure because you play like all these other creatures, so you just attack and your opponent can't do very much because you blink their removal spell, you blink their attack, and yeah, and the white just feels so good, and the more you play with this card, the more you just love it.
Yeah, I jokingly said to one of my friends, they basically printed a Golgari Dreadhorde Arcanist because it's literally untapped with a card, you win the game. Like, outside of getting comboed out, like it pretty much can win you the game against like 50% of the format just by itself. And obviously, it doesn't beat Storm or something like turn 1 combo, but that's a lot for a 2 drop.
Yeah, and yeah, it's slow, quote unquote, because it's a 2/2 that has to untap. But the format doesn't have. It's not actually a 2/2. I say a 2/2, but it's not, because when you play your opponent sometimes already kill your thing and etc. So both Reclaimer, sorry, Gnoble and Noble, they are 0/1, and in the format, of course, there's the card. I guess much less popular now, but Orcish Bowmaster. And feel like in Modern, basically X1s are kind of like shadow banned. I mean, not necessarily, because also Upright is very good, but in Modern, I feel like the pressure of Orcish Master is much more popular. Here, it's less popular, but also just the exchange of you playing an Hierarch and them playing Bowmaster is not bad, because you draw 0 extra cards. They do not block very well. I mean, they can chump block. It's not that you're gonna give them a creature with that. So it's just they're trading 2 mana for 1, and I feel like it's, I guess, overstated how bad are the hierarchs in the face of a Bowmaster.
Yeah, that's you put it exactly how I put it, because a lot of times people like who aren't familiar with Legacy or not familiar with this deck, they say, "Oh, they laugh. Like, how can you play X1s in a format of Bowmasters, especially before Psychic Frog kind of took Bowmaster's place?" And I said, "You don't draw any cards, so the text that text doesn't matter, and the trump blocks, like, this deck doesn't, it attacks, but it doesn't rely on attacking, if that makes sense. So really, yeah, there's paying 2 mana to your answer your 1 mana thing, so you're ahead on tempo, just like you mentioned."
Yeah, I guess I stole your idea because I watch a lot of your videos, so you can say that. But one thing I noticed, and it's interesting, is that you went down to Elvish Reclaimer. You're playing 3 now. This card is, I'm gonna say, the weaker of the deck. It's like the weaker creature of the deck. It used to be, so important to give the deck such an important tool, but now that you have the white, paying 2 mana for the same effect feels definitely worse. So I'm interested in seeing this avenue of you going down to 3 copies.
So I think everything you said there, I agree with. Having played another league just last night, my impression of the card is, even though I went down to 3, 4 might be correct, just because there's just so many graveyard decks that having density might be more important. And the other thing is, Safekeeper, I don't really like 3 copies because what I mentioned before, you don't really want to draw 2 copies, and you rather draw 2 Reclaimer than 2 Safekeeper. So I'm unsure what the correct number is, but I feel like just because it can win the graveyard, especially the linear ones, if you can stop the initial combo from Oopsaw spells, then it's literally 1 mana win condition. So I think ultimately 4 might just be too good not to play, but it really depends on the sideboard slots too, and how much extra space we have. I mean,
Yeah, I guess another change that we have is that you have the Collector Oof main deck, and I have it sideboard. So again, to talk about the sideboard changes, I think like in paper, the deck that get hurt by Collector Oof are less popular than online. Like, let's say maybe the One Ring Mystic Forge decks, or 8 cast. I'd say paper people just tend to play, brainstorm decks more often than not. So I feel like it's better as a cyber card. But definitely, like in at the first season tournament, for example, in the first 3 rounds, I sided it in. So I'd say it makes sense to have in main deck. I just don't have the slot. Although maybe I can go one Elvish Reclaimer. I don't know.
I think what you said is entirely accurate, and also to let the audience in on our just like our texting. I also was completely okay with the list that you registered for the 4 seasons and the impact returns because we came to the same conclusion. Yeah, paper. The collector oof main deck is less important. There's more combo on MTGO, so that's one clear difference. I probably, if I were recommending the list to somebody picking up the deck for paper, I definitely would lean towards the Grist over the collector oof main. But they kind of are is similar. That slot is kind of for one or the other, and you can just play whichever one you feel comfortable making.
Yeah, so let's get into this sideboarding. So um, the most common matchup will be blue black. So the various blue black decks either reanimate or the one without reanimate, and you have some answers to the psychic frog. So my choice is to play a couple of fatal push and a dismember, whereas you don't have these cards but go all in on snuff out, whereas I just play a couple of snuff out. So let's talk about these differences here because I'd say that you maybe have been not hurt by the frog that much that you need to play dismember and push. I guess you manage it with the white and the talon gates.
Just a combination of white talon gates, endurance. It depends how their board the game is playing out, but the main counter, so to speak, to their frog plan is the Wily the Reliquary, which, like I said, if you untap with it, I had a game earlier this week where they had triple frog draw, and I had a Wily the Reliquary that was a little bit late, and it still went the distance against 3 frogs because they can't stop it because especially if a later Wily Reliquary, that means your graveyard is probably full already, so it's big, and they're gonna have to start chumping at some point, like because it takes over the game. I do think if you struggle with frog, I would definitely recommend your list over like for somebody who's picking the deck. Right, I definitely would recommend your list over mine because it it relies on one other factor based on the boarding plan. I keep in natural order at the moment, and I think if you're somebody who doesn't want to worry about sequencing around days and things like that, it's easier to play the removal and just like move on.
Yeah, the cards that we cut in this matchup for those 5 are the 3 Natural Order, Atraxa, and Behemoth. These cards are actually, I mean, obviously, if you resolve it, you win. But resolving it's not easy because they have forces, they have Distress Spell. You might need to pitch this card to Endurance. So and you just remain this like creature deck. You just win with your white, with your Elvish Reclaimer, with your endurance, which is obviously like a beater. So this is my plan, and I like to side out natural order in almost every forceful matchup. The deck does not have a problem in winning the game. Natural order is mostly just here to win fast against the decks that aren't blue, which are which so maybe like the way to put it is natural order wins always the game against the non-blue deck. So for example, if you play against like Death and Taxes, you're gonna win the game almost always with natural order. But if you play against the combo deck, natural order gives you the avenue of winning on turn 3 before they win in game 1. So it's very powerful, and I really like the fourth copy in the side for this matchup basically, where you need to just go either faster or just need to have like this one card that wins the game against decks like Eldrazi, for example.
Yeah, I want to actually give you credit for that. One of the considerations for a long time that's like I've done over the years is uh, play the 4th natural order in the sideboard. It's a thing that dates back to the elf deck, but I hadn't done it in recent memory in the last few years. And it was you actually who convinced me. Oh, we should play this again because it just helps so much in like against Eldrazi or like sometimes you just need a fast kill. Like anything with Ancient Tomb is it's like very good. And or sometimes against like a sneak and show where you don't have any great cards, you just want to just kill them after your initial Thoughtseize, for instance. So that one, it was you who actually convinced me again to play the fourth natural in the sideboard, and I've liked the change a lot since then.
Yeah, so basically, like, against all the known force of will decks, I just like the fourth natural order. Play against Nadu, you play against Maverick, like all these decks, they just dirtle around alongside you, but you have like this one card that just wins. And you mentioned a Containment Priest. If they go Containment Priest in response, you can get Grist as a way to like save yourself from the Containment Priest, which is something that is cool.
Yeah, that's a really nice interaction against any of the white decks, right?
Yeah. Actually, is that how it works? Because you said it at the beginning, but I've actually never done it before. Just want to double check.
So it works against Containment Priest, but not Grafdigger's Cage. Just based on the way that the text reads.
Okay, so if a non-token creature would enter and it wasn't cast, exile it instead. So the way it comes is that when Grist comes into play, it's a Planeswalker, so it doesn't check the Containment Priest.
Exactly.
I guess. Oh, that's cool. That's super cool. Whereas Grafdigger's Cage says you just can't grab it.
It's a creature card, I believe, on Grafdigger's Cage.
Creature cards in graveyard libraries can't enter the battlefield. Okay, thank you for this. Yeah, I've never done it. I don't know if this never happened and I couldn't grab it, but yeah, definitely. Another thing that you have to be wary of is Dried Arbor. If there's a cage or a Containment Priest, you cannot put into play Dried Arbor from your deck, which is not intuitive if you never played it. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, one other interaction that is that may come up with Dried Arbor now, since we're talking about it, is the Thrall that the Stifle Knot decks play. It actually stops the combo with Springheart and Dried Arbor because it triggers. So that's something to keep in mind.
Yeah, let's discuss the combo Dried Arbor Nantuko because it's not an intuitive one. And actually, I remember I did that at 4th season, and my opponent was like, "Wait, is that infinite?" I'm like, "No, I just make like 2 of them." And anyway, so if you bestow Nantuko on Dried Arbor, what happens is that whenever you play a land, you pay 2 mana, you make a copy of Dried Arbor, which comes into play. It's a land, so it triggers a Nantuko again. So, for example, if you have a lot of mana with Gaia's Cradle, you end up making like a bunch of 1/1s, which doesn't seem great. But remember, this is a deck that just like does things very quickly, and in the meanwhile, taxes you maybe with the White of the Reliquaries and such, or the Endurance. So these little combos may sound like you just make some 1/1s, but this is all happening very quick. Like this could be, turn 3 and I already made like 6 creatures. So I'm threatening to attack for so much. And I think that's the strength of this deck. You just make heaps of mana super quickly, and any normal deck just falls behind immediately because of that. Of course, this deck doesn't have a great time against combo deck, but we have Endurance for those. For some of those, like Doomsday and Reanimator, suffer Endurance. So that's your hope. But of course, I wouldn't want to play against the combo decks with this deck.
Yeah, I think the matchup that I'm probably most afraid of that you can reasonably see is maybe Storm, because they should probably be aware of Endurance and avoid the Gaia's Will lines if they can. But even then, you have some text. At least you discourage them from doing that. So Endurance, yeah, just like very good. Doesn't stop every combo, but at least helps in the more common ones like Doomsday and obviously Rescaminator.
Yeah, at the tournament in 4th season, I played against lands, the new lands with So and Miko Spawn, and they were able to get the Tabernacle very quickly both games. But you basically have Gaia's Cradle, which just perfectly counters Tabernacle, and actually have to be very smart about it. Like you have to play it the turn after they play Tabernacle, you can't expose it to so make a spawn Wasteland in it, because now they play 4 Wasteland. So I was able to win 2-0 the matchup because you're always able to just fit, put this Gas Cradle against the Tabernacle in the turn, and you just go like Gas Cradle, something like Gas Cradle Natural Order, or just Gas Cradle protect my creatures. So again, that's another matchup where Natural Order is great because you just need to kill. You just need a card that you just tap 4 mana and the game is over. Of course, they have like the ring protection. The ring is good. You have the Collector Oof for the ring. That's one of the matchup I sided in against. The Collector Oof, of course, comes in against most Storm decks, most Storm kind decks, and this is a very important card alongside the 2 Force of Vigors. This was a card that I was a little bit on the fence about, but I remember it used as something like Force of Vigor is just a busted cyber card and we get to play it, so we have to play it. Even though it comes in handy in few matchups, like when it does, it's just it doesn't exist in a FF like that.
Yeah, I think it's like one of those things where one of my philosophies is I want to accentuate the strengths of the deck, and I want to lean into like what we do well, and we're one of the few decks that I guess any of the green decks or crop rotation decks can play Force of Vigor, but I think we should take advantage of the of our strengths. So Force of Vigor does that, and then in a similar vein, not every deck can play Snuff Out, and I know like depending on the list, you run 2 to 4 Snuff Outs, and again, not every deck can do it, but it's just a 0 mana kill. Like there's very few decks who can use that ability or that spell.
Yeah, that's that very very strong. Of course, when it happens, it's just that clause target non-black just makes me unable to play 4. But of course, against the Eldrazi, it's fantastic when you kill their glaring Flesh Raker or Thought Seer with it. Feels very very good. So most of the time, so I guess we should mention the last card in the sideboard is Thoughtseize. We play 4 copies of this. This comes in handy against all sort of combo deck, but it's also a filler, which is nice. Like whenever you have, or at least whenever I have to side out Natural Order and attracts and Behemoth, or maybe I have to side out, let's say, a Bajuka Bog against a non-graveyard deck, or I have to side out Nantuko against the combo deck. Well, I guess Thoughtseize is good against combo, but it's just a filler. Like whenever you need space to bring in, you know that you're gonna put in some Thoughtseize that will most often be good against everyone. So it's just nice to have a cyber card that just fills the void whenever you need to side out the Natural Order package.
Yeah, or just in general, like it has a very high floor. So if you sometimes you win and your opponent like, mulligan a bunch and they didn't show you much, it's a decent card to bring in those situations as well. I also like it against control because you take their like Wrath of the Skies or their brainstorm that's going to try to set up tournaments, things like that, or it can clear the way for even a natural order and you get Atraxa, which will probably win the game anyways.
Yeah, for sure. One more thing is that, so general sideboarding tips is that against Force of Will you cut the Natural Order package, against combo you cut the Nantuko package, against decks that don't care about graveyard you cut Endurance and Bajuka Bog. What else you have that is just a general suggestion for people approaching this deck?
I think everything you said there, I agree with. I think the only disclaimer I'll have is against control. I actually like the Natural Order package because it helps close the game quickly. I don't, depending on if you have the room or not, I probably wouldn't board in the form of Natural Order if I could avoid it. But I think it's nice to be able to just like, if they force your stuff early, then you can just have a one card combo that can just can slam through the game. I don't like it against any of the Days or Wasteland decks that are blue though, because for the reasons we discussed. So I think that's the only difference.
Yeah, so first season I played against Jessica Control, and game 1, after resolving a What with the Reliquary and another thing, I had the whole game 2 Natural Order in my hand, my opponent with 7 cards that were just cantripping, trying to find Plow, they never found it, and I just ended up winning with Lair of the Hydra attack, What with the Reliquary attack, and just that's it. And I never cast the two natural order in my hand because I knew that they most likely had force, one of the force of negation or force of will, and I just didn't want to sacrifice my creature. The sacrifice part, of course, is huge when your plan is just to attack with creatures that you don't want to sacrifice. Dried Arbor, of course, attacks very well. So often you just get dizzy and just there's only 20 life totals, and fetches maybe bring you to 16, and Lair the Hydra out of nowhere is definitely nice. Like, you have the skills sometimes that are really just unpredictable. Like, you have, I guess, Cradle, a bunch of mana that I mentioned with Nantuko before. You just get a Lair the Hydra end of turn, you have a Cradle, you play another Cradle, you just amass like 10 mana, and even without casting anything, so again, not like a non-force of willable kill spell that is Lair the Hydra, just out of nowhere attacking for 10 with the gas cradles, which is such a powerful land that this deck has the pleasure to play.
Yeah, I think the Lair of the Hydra, like when I first added it to the deck, this was even before Why the Reliquary. Like, I got a lot of like confused faces, like, oh, why do you want Lair in the deck? And the answer is easy. Like, sometimes you just have to kill your opponent. So like, Reclaimer is really strong before, and like, it makes a lot of mana because it finds Guy's Cradle or can bog somebody. But so, at the end of the day, you still have to put your opponent to 0, and Lair of the Hydra is the best way to do that. That without hurting your mana base too much, because it produces green still, right?
Yeah, so the first time I met you, and I met you, I mean, online, was when I started doing elves content. This was like, maybe it was like 2 years ago when I decided to buy the three guest credit I was missing because I only owned one for Cube. So I had these credits, and I was like, all right, let's build elves. And you contacted me with because again at the time, so which was like 2 years ago, elves was strong. Elves was one of the deck to play, whereas now it got basically just replaced by this everything but elves type of deck. And that yeah, the great guest cradle is much better in this deck because you actually have just creature land to also do something alongside the spells to cast. And again, this land is just honestly fantastic. It's a creature that comes to play untapped on turn 1 or 0. Of course, it's wastelandable, and sometimes I guess we have to discuss when is correct to fetch forest on turn 1. I think that's always an interesting thing that this deck has, because sometimes on turn 1 you have like Noble Hierarch or Ignoble Hierarch or Grist and Zenith, I guess, and you just have to decide whether to fetch for a Bayou or a Forest. And my thought is that on the draw, let's say you play against Risk Combinator, on the draw, I like to fetch for Forest because I don't want to get like the reset, which is just Wasteland Push, just to reset you to 0 basically. But maybe on the play, I do Bayou because I want to be able to just not have to worry about black mana for the rest of the game. And this is a marginal thing that I was just getting Bayou even on the draw, but I think you should get Forest.
I think a lot of it for me personally, I think your heuristic is solid. I think the only thing I would add is if I already have Wily Reliquary in hand, I don't want a dead card because if I don't have a second fetch, I would just fetch Bayou because it's gonna be dead otherwise. And if they wasteland me, then that's just something I live with, even on the draw. But otherwise, I mostly agree. And I think the only thing I'll add is I sometimes get questions, or I see people sequence wrong with Lair of the Hydra, like when to play it. As a general heuristic, if you're unsure, I think it's correct to play Lair on 1. The reason being is because you never know when you're going to top deck Cradle, and you don't want to not be able to play Cradle on 2 and then have your Lair come and tap later on. That's a general heuristic for Lair for me. There are some situations where it's correct to not lead with it, obviously, like especially against a Blood Moon deck. But for the most part, I've found that if you're unsure, that's probably the better play.
And that's an interesting one. I definitely remember situations when I didn't play Lair on turn 1 and I had to play Bayou on turn 2 because I play Forest, to play Bayou on turn 3, on turn 2 because they killed my thing, and now all of a sudden Lair is a tap land, which is definitely much worse than being untapped. And I guess one more thing that we didn't say, but it's important to say, is that you would rather start the game with Grist and Zenith for Dread Arbor rather than Elvish Reclaimer. It's super important that we have a one drop. I'm sure I listened to you saying this, so maybe you can say that better. But it's so much more important than having a one drop than having a reclaimer on turn one is just bad. Like in a vacuum, like if you don't know the matchup.
Yeah, I think unless you know for sure you're playing against like an Oops Off Spells or like a black red reanimator, I definitely would always go turn one dork, and that's why we play 12 of them, right? We have the 8 hierarchs and then the 4 green suns and with the 2 dried arbors. So and then I guess some number of Once Upon a Time too. Like it's just so the deck is just so much more powerful when you have 3 mana on turn 2.
Yeah, exactly. Or even more if you have something like turn two Nantuko into gas Cradle. And another play that often happens with this deck, and I guess we can approach that, is when to play around days with Nantuko. Because what you can do sometimes is, you go land hierarch, they do whatever, land ponder or land Samuel, and then you open yourself to the option of, do I go Nantuko bestow and then, fetch land fetch to get 2 tokens, or do I go fetch land Nantuko bestow to play around days? Uh, are there some like rules that you have, or is it something that obviously depends? I mean, it's Magic. So.
I think it. I think there are some heuristics that are. I can't say they're always applicable, but most of the time they are. I think if you're playing against a Days Wasteland deck, in general, I don't like to this deck is secretly a tempo deck too, as I'm sure you figured out like really quickly, like because you get ahead, but I don't like to lose my 2 mana spell to their 0 mana spell. So if your line on turn 2 is to play Springheart, I would rather play the fetch land out, lose a token, but then you play around Days then, and then you can play whatever hierarch or whatever with your 3rd mana after fetching, and you get the 1 token at least.
Yeah, yeah. I think it really depends on your hand. So if you have something like Natural Order and something else like Endurance and etc., you have a ton of threats, so you're just happy if they just bounce their land. But if you are like land light, then you really want the sorry, if you're spell light, then you really want the Nantuko to resolve. And again, like just one more thing with the Nantuko is when to pay the 2 mana to copy your hierarch is something that often, when you play, you have this question a lot like, would I play this, I don't know, Zenith for Elvish Reclaimer, or would I copy this Ignova hierarch that I bestow? And I think that is another question that obviously depends, but it really matters your situation. Like if you play against a normal deck, then you want to just bestow. You want to just make value, and your opponent will eventually you will just send in an attack with Exalted for 5 out of nowhere, and you meanwhile you just double spell, triple spell, and etc. And I think and I tend to copy a lot, but I don't know. Maybe you copy less with the Nantuko.
I think it depends on how much mana we have. I think if we have a lot of mana, it's probably correct to copy, assuming you don't have any other relevant play. And then I think you probably already figured this out. If it's on a Ride of the Reliquary, I think I almost always copy because it's just so strong.
Yeah, of course. The combo what to the Reliquary plus Nantuko. You just make an insect, you suck that insect. But yeah, so basically, one more thing about white. So with this podcast, with this thing, I'll try to like give tips so that people can play this deck. And again, like let's just say these scenarios that happen all the time. Like, do I activate my white or do I play around removal? And this is important, and it very much matters about the clock. So if it's like super early game, your opponent is on 15, then yes, you tap it. If they have removal spell that they have drawn in the meanwhile, that's okay. Or at least that's what I do. You get some value, you get your Cradle. Maybe you don't have Cradle, that you really want to get it. But if it's late, like your opponent is just dead next turn, so they have to push it, you don't tap it because you want to make them push it, and then you save it with the Talon Gates. So what would the Reliquary is usually activate always, but just last turn don't activate it. This is my approach.
Or not even last turn. If you're like significantly ahead, there's really no reason to activate it.
Yeah. Again, that against that just matchup, my opponent at the end of the game said like you risked a lot by tapping it because what if I had plow? I was like, you know, it's too early to play around plow. Like if you had it, you would have killed me you would have killed the white when I played it, so I just put you off of plow. But yeah, overall, I guess the Watch of the Reliquary gameplay will just try to be like a typical curve of this deck is like land elf, land hierarch, land Watch of the Reliquary plus something else. You know, if you have a Zenith there, I don't mind just getting a Dried Up or just to have a dominant board saved. Just don't pass the turn. I noticed that you don't play Underground Mortuary anymore, but I still have, so that just helps me curve out in case I have a hole. I can just get a fetch land and just put the Surveillance into play. But I want to ask, what's the reason for you to having cut this?
It could just be that I'm very conservative with my mana base. I wanted essentially just a 15th untapped green source on turn one, so I mulligan less. That's the main reason. It's because I feel the early game of this deck matters so much more than a late game, that I was willing to sacrifice a little bit of filtering late for the more consistent starts or mulligan fewer, because I didn't have a turn one green source. That's basically the idea behind it. So I have a
Yeah,
10th
so
fetch.
yeah, exactly. We have a 10th fetch land, so you have 15 starters that are green. Uh, I just feel like, alongside the Once Upon a Time is really like a lot of consistency. And I just feel like the value that the Mortuary gives you, either just pumping the White of the Reliquary by milling a creature, or just obviously like you're flooding, you just get a Mortuary. I would not give it up. So I try to make you change that idea and put the Mortuary back.
I,
It's
I I
it's very
definitely
powerful.
I definitely have considered putting it back. There's definitely times, like for sure in the mid game or late game, where you want to see it, but I'll see how much it feels like. Obviously, the Once Upon a Time is just a very broken card, so it allows us to play fewer lands and things like that. But it's definitely between those two. I'll put it that way. Like, I tried another utility land like a Baseju, but it just felt awful. Like, I'd rather just have either the consistent mana base, which I guess the 10th fetch would do, or the additional grind of the underground mortuary. I think those are the two best options for the 24th land, which I see lists with 23 or even 22 lands. I definitely would not recommend that, because as you mentioned earlier in the podcast, it's just so important to hit land drop every turn, especially with Springheart Nantuko being a way to utilize that.
Yeah, so Boseiju is definitely something I thought of, and I was like, wow, this is weird. Like, this is a green deck. Why doesn't it play Boseiju? The reality is that you can't fetch it and put it into play, and that's what this deck wants to do. And there's also maybe not that many artifact enchantment they want to kill. Maybe like the only one I think is Animated. So I think it's not that much needed, and I prefer the current the current mana base. Um, Anything else you feel like we should share with the listeners? And think,
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
think. Oh, one thing I wanted to add is a question I get asked a lot is like, oh, do you just try to hoof them early whenever you can and just have enough creatures on board? At my personal playstyle, I'm not sure how it is for you, Andrea, but if they have open mana, and unless hoof is lethal through removal, I
or you said Crater Hoof.
yeah. So
Okay, okay, okay.
unless Cradle Hoof is lethal through a removal spell, I will typically play it safe and just get Atraxa. But that's my personal playstyle. I'm not sure how you've been playing, but for me, the Atraxa trigger is just so strong that if I have to wait another turn to kill my opponent, then that's fine. Like, I will typically default to Atraxa as the main natural order target.
Yeah, it always, as always, we've been saying this a lot. It depends on the matchup. If you're playing against a normal deck, a deck that doesn't combo you, then you just get a track. So you get your value, make the 7/7 that draws 4 cards, because this deck actually has a enchantment, sorceries, lands, and also especially natural Atraxa just gives you natural order back, or it gives you Cradle plus Zenith, so you get to hoof next turn for sure. Not for sure, of course, but it's very likely that you just play another Crater Hoof. next turn. So yeah, I agree with you. Although, of course, you can put your opponent on a range. Like, if they have not killed your White of the Reliquary in their turn, that means they don't have removal spell. So you're probably safe to just go for it and win. Uh, but yeah, this is definitely like just go for a Trax. And also a Traxa, it's actually in the Hoof, of course. Hoof is much easier to cast because it's with a single guy's Cradle. But a Traxa, you need some like workaround to cast it because your mana base is only green black. So white and blue, you can get that from noble hierarchs, and you have like either two noble hierarchs, or you can bestow. Like, when in doubt what to bestow with the Nantuko, you should put it on the noble hierarch because that gives you white and blue mana to cast a Shraxa. That's like a super corner case thing. And you have the Talon Gates, which also filters. So you can tap 8 mana or 9 mana if you have 2 Talon Gates and put the Atraxa into play. Which again, it seems like incredible number, but you notice it's not hard at all. Like, if you have Nantuko and Cradle, it's super easy to just get to incredible amount of mana to play these spells. And I guess one last thing we can say is the Mulligan decisions. That's very important. So, I guess this is from your channel. You say that you should always try to mulligan to a hand that has a starter. So either Hierarch, Noble, Zenith. What are you on keeping a hand with, like, let's say, 3 lands, Once Upon a Time, white, stuff like that?
I probably So the thing is, like, if it's 3 lands white and like a Once Upon a Time, but we don't have a hierarch, the percentage chance of hitting a hierarch off the Once Upon a Time is like not great. It depends how you feel Reclaimer is in that matchup. If you think Reclaimer is probably okay and you can live with, a Reclaimer into white curve or Reclaimer into like Nantuko curve, then I think it's reasonable. Otherwise, I would probably put that back. In most cases, though, like I said, like we said, you really want to start with turn 1 Dork. Like that, it's just the game looks very different if you don't have that.
Yeah. One more thing is endurance. I think endurance is a tiebreaker. If I am doubtful about keeping a mulligan and there's endurance, I usually keep because it lets you win games that no other cards in the deck lets you win. And again, since I have the mortuary, sometimes even if I don't have a 1-drop, I'm just happy to just fetch a mortuary, put into graveyard a land, or even a creature. I'm very aggressive to put in a graveyard with the mortuary because a creature pumps your white. So I like that aspect, and I just feel like so important this card, the endurance.
Yeah, I think one aspect that we see a lot less of now because red removal is less popular due to frog. But before, something that you could do is like if they bolt your Reclaimer or they bolt your Wild the Reliquary, you could like fetch for Mortuary, try to bid a land or a creature depending on whether it's Reclaimer or white, and then essentially counterspell the Lightning Bolt or even a Fury.
Yeah, that's definitely interesting. Yeah, you mentioned Fury. Thankfully, that's a card I've never played against. Still in all my rounds, it sounds a nightmare.
It's difficult because the decks that play are usually also really fast, so you can't just like it's hard to play around while still being aggressive. You know what I mean? Like, if your opponent goes turn 1 like Rabble Master, it's not like you can just sit back.
Yeah, that's definitely a tough matchup with the early aggression and also the Chalice of the Void, which hurts this deck a lot because, well, if they go Chalice in 1, your turn 1 is just land go, and then you have 12 creatures, 12 cards that are strangled in your hand. Actually, that's how I lost against Eldrazi. In my top 8 match in Spain, they just started with Chalice on the play, and I just died. And
Yeah, it can be hard to beat Chalice when we're on the draw for sure. One thing that I had come up a lot against these Chalice decks is if they do that, a lot of times I'll just go, especially if you don't have the Mortuary, which I don't at the moment, is I'll just run a 1-drop into the Chalice because I know I want to grow my Wild Reliquary, especially against these Fury decks, right? So most of the times, I think it's correct if you have spare mana to just run your 1-drop into the Chalice to grow your white because you have a faster clock.
yeah, and that's it. I think we have discussed a lot. I want to say that we are not responsible for your finance that may get hurt by buying Gaia's Cradle. if you're listening this and spending a lot of money on gas Cradle, it's not our fault. You made your choice.
I will
But
say, there's a good chance you'll make up your money back. Maybe not quickly, but over time.
yeah, at least it's on the reserve list, and nobody will ban Gaia's Cradle from Legacy, so it's gonna be a safe quote unquote investment.
Right.
But
There you go.
yeah, all right. Thank you so much, Newton, for being here. I had so much pleasure speaking about this deck because I honestly just never talk about this deck to anyone in all my content. I do some videos here and there. Actually, I have one scheduled in the next week where I'm so happy to play this deck on stream. But definitely wanted this meeting to happen. Where can people find you? What's a way that people can join your Patreon?
Oh, sure. On my Twitter, one second. Uh, for,
It's okay. I can also open that.
okay, yeah. If you, my Twitter is my username is hello_Newton. Unfortunately, the hello Newton without the underscore was already taken like randomly. So on there is also my link tree. So on the link tree you have access to my videos, or as you would say, the VEEDEOs, and
Yeah.
there's my Patreon, my Twitch channel, and anything else you want. Actually, the Discord channel is also accessible. You can find that on my Twitch page. But everything there is like mostly free content. The only thing is the Patreon is only $5 for anybody who is interested in. But I think this video that you made today already helps. So there's that as well.
I am super happy to share, of course, other creators. And yeah, so thank you so much. I hope you guys enjoyed this. If you listen to the whole episode, we also have a Patreon, patreon.com/carnies for this episode of the podcast, where usually we don't talk about Legacy. This is why today I'm without Anthony and Javier. And if you have any other decks that you want to listen about and we never really spoke about, say it in the comments. I'll definitely be answering them. All right. Thank you so much for being here, Newton. I hope you had a good time, and I hope to meet you at some point in these Legacy tournaments.
Yeah, I haven't been able to play too much Paper Magic because I think most of my followers know that I have a 1-year-old baby at the moment, but I'm hoping to be able to get there out soon to meet you and others at like some of these big events, hopefully like an Eternal Weekend or something like that in the future. I won't be able to do it this year, but that's definitely on my to-do list.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much, and have a great rest of the day.
You too, likewise. And it was a pleasure to be on with you, and I had a lot of fun.
Thank you. Bye-bye.